it's not just an abstract concept, but a concept that is embedded in our everyday lives. Is actually, I also think we need to demystify the idea that values and ethics is very abstract and academic, that only belongs to theologians and ethicists. I think we need to bring the discussions or dialogue around values in our everyday decisions and discussions, and the informal conversations on the streets, in the corridors, in schools, as through questions rather than through imposition, of course.
I know values and beliefs is a big part of the Summit Series project that I'm a part of, but I'm not the expert on that. I wonder if anybody has questions about thinking of that in everyday practice and behavior and language and so forth, as opposed to a theoretical or research approach to understanding values and beliefs.
Yeah, I think we need to shrink the gap between our day-to-day lives and the discourse around the values, or something that is up there, very abstract. We need to shrink that gap.
When I talk about a worldview, that's kind of, it's our values in action. So it's not just what we think, but it's how we are in the world, behaving. And that was the closest I could come to this idea that it isn't just, and I could believe a certain way, I might have a set of values, but I may not act on them. Or I may want to act on them, but not have agency. So it's how do I bring all of those ideas together? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's how I think of it. And I use the term practice often. I talk about practice in the sense of teaching practice, but also not just practice as a verb, but practice as a noun. How do we develop a practice of being that is informed by our values or our dispositions?
I'd like to come in here, because I am also learning, and I'm very, very much interested in listening to all of you. You might know better than I do, but in Nigeria, we have in our curriculum values education. Mm-hmm. The values education, as it were, is not is just theoretical. And I tried to read, there's a book written by one of our professors, a renowned professor, on values education. And the little I was able to get from it, it's an abstract term. And because it's an abstract term, it appears it's difficult for people to really implement that even in the classroom at the lower levels, how much more the higher levels. But from the little I gathered, it seems to me, from my understanding, that it incorporates both personal, family, societal, community, and the worldview in everything that we do, and on how those things impact on people around us and in the world. And it has to do with, from what I read, with the decisions you take your thoughts, your ideas, your practices, your decisions, and the way you behave, all of which should be geared towards worldview, the good values of the worldview, because they all have impact to people in the world. That's what I think. I don't know, but I'm here to learn.
Well, one of the comments that I've heard people say in passing in the hallway about values-based education is, well, whose values are you teaching? And so how do you reconcile that in practice as opposed to theory?
I think humanity somehow have some shared values as human beings. Despite our many beautiful differences, cultural, religion, different contexts, differences that needs to be respected and celebrated, all the diversity of our cultures. But at the same time, we can share a number of basic human values. I can understand and I can see how people feel, you know, it's like the same thing of being the idea of oneness and diversity living together at the same time. Freedom and limits at the same time. And I can at the same time cherish my own culture and at the same time being part of one human civilization. Without the fact that we embrace one vision, not one vision, but a vision of Earth community, a vision of one human civilization, evolved civilization, ecological civilization, that there is across borders, across our political and cultural borders. It does not mean that if I embrace that, I have to give my back to my religion and my cultural tradition. I can have both at the same time. And somehow my feeling is that we have been taught to fear, to embrace something that it goes beyond our limited circle and border, because otherwise it will be giving the back to our own selves. So I like that book from John Rawls a lot. I think the title is The Laws of the People. And in that book, he writes about a concept called the veil of ignorance. I don't know if you have seen it. But for me, that concept that Rawls articulated, he says, well, if people are able to put the veil of ignorance, that veil of ignorance is a metaphor that John Rawls articulates to say, if for a few moments we do not know where we are from, we would look at someone from another part of the world and see this humanity, the similarity among all of us, with the eyes of human being to human being, and not attaching to my own culture. Anyway, I like the way in which he articulates that notion that's why he wrote that book called The Laws of the People. But the coin, the term on the veil of ignorance, I think it's very interesting, because when you put the veil of ignorance, it means that you cover what you know up until now, because what you know is what you have learned from your culture, not attached from your culture. And when you do that, you can use new glasses and see things from another angle. And in that angle, you would see the oneness or the similarity between you and I and me and people from across borders. In any case, the borders that we now know were not always there, no? The political borders that divide our countries. These were created at some point in human history, and then there's a specific purpose to promote in our mental models this notion of nationalism, attaching to my nation and my culture, to protect from others. Anyway, this is maybe too historical thing, but I just wanted to point to the fact that these are social constructs also, that we can question what am I attached to. I think we should first feel attached to human family, to humanity, without necessarily detaching ourselves from our own culture. Sorry, I'm too long here.
No, thank you very much. Anybody else have a comment about that?
have just been reflecting a bit on how I have sought to deal with values in some of my teacher education classes. I haven't been teaching for a few years since I'm retired, except for my online teaching. But I recall values analysis exercises being quite useful for students to see the diversity of values that may be operating in conflict with each other in certain situations. For example, we have a pristine piece of environment in our country called the cockpit country, in which we had quite a lot of debate as to whether bauxite mining should take place there because, you know, it had important aquifers, important forests, important biodiversity, etc. And when we set up role plays in the classroom in which the students try to envisage the positions of different stakeholders around bauxite mining in that situation, they begin to work with the values. So what are the values of the environmentalists then in wanting to protect the pristine nature of this environment? What's the values of the bauxite company or of the local people who are there with their cultural traditions and so forth within that environment? And when we either role play it or debate it, the students come to appreciate the diversity of values that exist. Those are the kinds of exercises I have used in the past to bring values into understanding situations.
This is beautiful, beautiful and very clear. I like that approach in the, at least from our Earth Charter perspective. I think it requires looking at different situations, as you rightly say, asking the right questions and giving space for people to have a critical reflection and value examination of how they would approach different situations with different dilemmas without necessarily having to come with the right answer.
That's right.
Is right, almost like what would different people do in this situation, why, what could be the consequences, and just have promote a dialogue to question dialogue around the given situation to try to identify the values that underlie the given situation and the various decisions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
So, Miriam, would you please describe the transformation that happens in the online course that is based on the Earth Charter, the one that starts in January and runs through June, that is an online certificate in ESD, and it has a large Earth Charter component to it. I observed, but I wasn't teaching this section, you and Alicia were teaching this section on the Earth Charter, but I noticed there was a transformation in how the students embrace the Earth Charter. One, when they learned about it, and then there was a systematic framework for values for living and seeing the world with a sustainability worldview. There's a transformation that goes on. Could you describe that?
Well, I think there's no recipe for transformation.
It's amazing.
Yeah, there's no recipe for transformation, but I think what teachers and facilitators can do is to provide space. To provide space in which we invite people to reflect, observe, share in dialogue. We try to offer people to look at their chat as an instrument to expand their understanding of what sustainability is. People, as we all know, have different ways to approach sustainability, different ways to to understand it. And we invite people to look at their charter as something that helps to articulate a vision of sustainability. But rather than just, so one exercise is to look at the concepts and how we understand it. But I think the main goal is trying to bridge it with people's life stories, connecting it, connecting this abstract concept to a real life story, not of someone else, but of my story. And by connecting to real life stories and by sharing it and reflecting upon it, I think there are a number of things that happen there. Is a sense of connection, a sense of empathy with one another when we listen to the stories of others. And it's like taking a text outside the paper and making these words alive through people's life. And then that creates meaning. I cannot give you the meaning of respect for the community of life. We can talk about the theoretical understanding of what is respect and care for the community of life, what that means, and we can spend 1 year talking about the significance of that from a theoretical approach. But when we offer people the opportunity to connect with the concept and make that be connected with some real life story and a deep reflection, I think that's when maybe transformation or meaning is created. So it's each person has to create their own meaning, their own connection to the concepts. We cannot give it to them. I mean, we can give it to them, but it's not transformative. If someone says, this is what respect means, and this is why respect is important, unless someone feels it and experiences it and connects it with part of their life story. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
I'm interested in, the question that Michele asked a few minutes ago and you said, that when people ask whose values should we be teaching or whose values should we be learning, it's not the case that the values that we discuss and I think promote in our work in educating for sustainability and in the Earth Charter these are not values neutral positions that we're taking. We certainly have a set of values, and one of the things that we see when we come together as sustainability educators is how quickly we understand our shared values. So it's one of the things that I've always enjoyed about this community is I feel like when I'm together with other people who engage in this work, I've reconnected with a lost tribe. There are these people all over the world who have a shared set of values. And I think that's also true. And we have, there may be differences around the edges and in not necessarily small areas, but are contextual differences. And I think that's also true for preparing teachers. For me, that's one of the things I've enjoyed over the years about working with teachers from around the world and around the US, is if I get in a room full of teachers, there's going to be, again, with regional differences, but some shared values about the well-being of children, of youth, the importance of learning. I mean, there are some things that we could quickly identify as a set of shared values, and there may be differences. But the challenges that I think we have in the world, and I'm guessing that you might have had in the back of your mind, Michele, I'm thinking in the US, but not only in the US, is there are values that are informing public policy, they're informing decisions, business decisions, they're not just at contrast with the values that we might talk about and share in small ways. There are fundamental and really quite huge differences in values about the value of life, valuing all life, valuing the need for equity, for justice. And I find at some point, I think that because we are educators and teaching is a moral act, that there is a need at some point to be able to say, this is the line, these are the values that we adhere to here. And there are other values that are in contrast and actually working in opposition to those values. So that's where I find the discussion of values really becomes much more fraught. And I think it's also work that we have to take on in some way.
It's, again, as a newbie to this area somewhat, but working with a lot of people who are experts in this area, I hear things and, perceive things, but it's striking how many people that I work with on these international projects have similar values. And I would imagine that those values are what get us through. So that while other people may have more closed off, more nationalist view or whatever it might be, without somebody having values that reach beyond that, we would never be able to move forward or go together or connect. So I don't know. It's interesting. I grew up in rural America and but I don't have many of the values that many people have in rural US, and I lived all over the US in rural areas. So it's very curious to me how we end up with the values that we have. But it's shocking to me how we do reach a brick wall sometimes with the differences in the U.S. That we experience daily right now, especially where we can't seem to move forward. And I wonder, how do we maintain our values but work through that? So I really appreciate what you all are describing, like Miriam, when you're talking about values that allow us to reach beyond that, and anything that helps us live our values in practice without creating conflict and a dead end would be extremely helpful to know, to discuss, to be able to talk about in our classes, no matter what they are.
I think if we start with the questions, it helps a lot, rather than starting with answers when it comes to values-based education. It helps because you're not giving the answer, you're giving a question, and therefore there's space for people to reflect. But the question needs to be clear, in the sense, for instance, of course, if we are looking at a more just, sustainable world, the values of that are completely different from values of unsustainability and unjust world. So the question is, what would be the world in which we all want to live? What are the requirements for that? And if we allow people to have a dialogue about what are the 10 or the 5 or the 2 basic things that are needed for humanity to live together in a shared planet, people will normally come with very similar values. I mean, if you are North Pole, South Pole, East, West, I have done it a number of times with different groups, and the answers are very similar in the sense of respect and responsibility and justice, and we need to be care for the vulnerable, etc. So the way in which we like to use the charter is just as a reference, something that you can answer these questions first, and then you can see that it's already written there as a kind of a mirror. but the questions come from within. I mean, the answers come already firsthand from within each context, within each person and group. And then you can check and see, oh, actually, this is more or less already written, maybe in a different way, in a nice way, or it's more complicated way. And try to link up to that. But certainly we need to be clear with questions with regards to what's the kind of world we want to live? What's the kind of human civilization we want to have? And therefore, what are the values that we need to have in order to achieve that desired place where we want to be?
Having that kind of dialogue is probably key to all of this. It's too easy not to do that, never to reflect or to stop and think, what am I doing? And is this the life I want to lead, or that I think is going to get me where I believe we should go? So thank you for that.
I have a question and a comment. Should values be assessed? I think about teacher education, and I think about like when we go out to assess teachers on practicum, teaching practice. I remember having discussions around whether or not our teachers should be, whether there should be a grade assigned to the values that they demonstrate, they express, or not. Because so often in our system, if it's not graded, if it's not tested, then unfortunately it can easily be ignored or seen as unimportant. And very often values, when we talk about values and effective skills, they're often referred to as soft skills. And sometimes referring to them in that way, it seems to me, sometimes that will probably diminish their importance or their necessity. So I'm just wondering, what do you guys think about how do you mainstream something like that? How do you make it highly visible? Should it be assessed? And you know, on lesson plans, our teachers have to write about the effective area in their objectives. But very often that really gets sidelined. So how do we treat it?
That's a good question. And probably I should add my own question to yours, because I'm also trying to get these things pieced together for my country, learning from the Americas. Values education in the classroom, how do we handle that? Because it is the how that should impact on the system and on sustainability. And then the assessment, like, has just been recognized. But I need help here. In my country, we are a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society. And somehow it seems to me that the reason we can't get off the ground with the values education as is in our curriculum is because of this multifarious nature of our ethnicity and the religion that puts the teacher at a crossroad, not knowing what to do. I'll give you a recent example. Just earlier this week, Monday, or Tuesday, in fact, on Tuesday, the news came. I studied in University of Ibadan. It's a first generation university. And we suddenly heard that the school, the primary school there, was shut down and pupils were asked to go. Why? Because one religious sect, the parents of some pupils there, just decided to dress their pupils with hijab. And they suddenly showed up in the school. And some teachers were scared and said, no, we can't have this. And the parents insisted that their children must be there. And for such things, it took some 2 days before the vice chancellor, the head of the university that oversees that school, called a PTA, and somehow they are still managing it. The school is not yet open. My problem now is in the classroom. How do we manage in a diverse society? How do we manage the different values that pupils come to school, to the classroom? If you apply like role playing in teaching, you may go against the values of the other. I heard Miriam say the values depend on individuals or on groups, on the way you say it. So, and especially if it is from various ethnic groups. So how do we manage it? How do we come about getting it taught or going, meandering through it in our classroom situation? If we don't teach it, and if we teach it, how do we assess it? If we don't teach it, how do we apply it in order not to incur the wrath of others that have different values from ours or from the values that we are applying, in order to get our teaching learning progress smoothly? So
Am I the one who is supposed to jump in here? Or anyone else? Huh? So, I don't have all the answers to this, but maybe some thoughts. On the question on assessment, there is a group of people very interested in doing assessment of values-based education. And they have, we have been involved in that project. There is actually a website with the results of that project. It's called wevalue.org. It was led by Brighton University in the UK. And their argument, and I think it's an argument that we kind of share, is that we should be able to assess values-based education in a qualitative way. They have been doing this research for a few years, and we have someone in our office here, Alicia Jimenez, who is more involved in that. I am not. I can see the importance of that, but maybe I was hearing two things. One is the values that are embedded in the pedagogical approach. Another thing is the values that are embedded in the content. I think they are different. One thing is the how we teach and the values of, I think that the educator should create environments of respect and care and compassion as part of the pedagogical approach. And another thing which goes together, but it's just another angle, is the values that we can actually embed, not only, by the way, in classes of values and ethics or spirituality, is classes of mathematics, social studies, language. And I think we could incorporate values education when we are teaching English, when we are teaching science, when we are in a space of social studies, math, and any other subject. I think it should be cross-cutting, because in a mathematical exercise, we could embed a value question, a question to make the students reflect on the consequences of a mathematical problem, for instance. So, I think we can and should be able to assess, but not in a way that it will become an obsession, or not in a way that it will become main driver, because I think sometimes we have forgotten the higher purposes of learning and education because of assessments in both angles. Teacher being assessed by the school principal being assessed by the education system assessing the school, and then the students being assessed by the system. So there's a kind of a little bit over attention given to assessments, and that is misleading from the higher purpose of education. But let me give you a concrete example from a university in Costa Rica here. So I'm in Costa Rica, so there's a university here called the National University, Universidad Nacional. And for a number of years, they created what they call the Earth Charter Student Award. And they wanted to award a student that excelled not in his grades or his or her academic grades, but he excelled in his human behavior with regards to how he or she related to their community. So they went through a process of 6 months of looking around and asking students and faculty to give kind of points to different students in a way to give them recognition based on how much they were able to live by certain values such as respect, care, responsibility, collaboration, and etc. So I thought it was an interesting approach from that university. It was not academic, but it was an approach to assess in an informal way and give a sort of recognition to something that is beyond an academic grade, but probably in certain minds could be seen as more important than academic grades. If we look at it from the understanding that you could have high grades in an excellent academic degree and be a human being that is very low in humanity values of living together, in a space. So anyway, let me stop here. It's too long. But I hope this helps a little bit in this notion of assessing, and I can understand the importance of that. It's just that I'm not dedicating much of my thinking and time on that. I know there are more other people who are dedicating more, and I can see the importance of that.
So along the same lines, I'm just curious, are there specific things, if you were assessing values, thinking of a analytic rubric, for example, what would be on that rubric? What measures look across and should be rewarded for that, in the case of understanding values in a student who has engaged with their community in a way that represents positive values, if that's the right way to say it.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give you maybe I'm going to show an example, 2 examples. I think we have time, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have created 2 things maybe to show very quickly. This group, I'm going to show you I'm going to share my screen. Just 1 second. I cannot share my screen. I don't know.
We can do it for you. So, hang on.
Let's just try to.
So you should have screen sharing available now.
Okay, so we have 2 things. So one is an instrument that we developed here a long time ago called Earth Charter Assess. So the instrument is basically the Earth Charter. in an Excel file. So very, very, very down to earth thing. Let me just pull this here.
Do you see screen sharing? Do you have screen sharing now?
Maybe at the bottom of your screen.
1 second, sorry. I was not expecting these interesting questions to come.
Rectangle with an arrow.
Yes. No, I'm using this stop recording. Normally I think I'm in the wrong.
It should be, if you move your cursor over the video screen of yourself, the bigger screen, you should see share at the bottom as a green square with an arrow.
I'm so sorry. I think I got lost. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Are you on a Windows or Mac or something else?
I'm on Windows.
Okay.
I'm used to use this platform. It's just that I'm not finding normally the bottom of where I should be. But basically, let me just say without showing, I guess, if you picture, because now I actually lost even all of you.
Yeah, it's confusing on mine as well. That's what I was asking for because I have so many windows open. The icon for Zoom, if you need to find it, is just a blue circle with a camera on it. If that helps find us. Or maybe Alt tabbing will take you through the screens or something.
That's very odd. Just one more little second. See if I can find this. I think I found it.
All
I had
right.
to change a lot today's screen. So let me see if I can share. So the first one, maybe this one. Let's see if it comes. Can you see? No.
Yes, we can see your screen, your PowerPoint.
So this is a very old PowerPoint, by the way, but it's just what I wanted to share. Maybe it's towards the end of it. So this is a part of a project that we have developed here many years ago, actually. And the idea was to offer a tool which people could use if they want to use in different contexts. So and I know different groups have used it in local communities, in a university, or in a classroom. Not so much, I haven't really seen people to use it really as a scientifically based assessment tool, but as a tool to offer an idea, but also to generate a dialogue. So the how here is basically the Earth Charter inside an Excel file. If I can find the Excel file, so the exercise goes into these 5 steps. No, we select a subject. So am I going to assess project, a school, a curriculum? Actually, I did have a student using that to assess a curriculum many years ago. And then we look at the subject that we are assessing through the lenses of the Earth Charter. And then it goes through an exercise of evaluation that goes like this. The first question is, what is the level of care of that subject that I'm assessing in relation to each Earth Charter principle? And the result of that, after a long time, because it's like looking at something that we are assessing through the lenses of the Earth Charter, requires time and requires information from various stakeholders, no? But the main idea here is how important it is for this institution, how important, like principle 5 of the Earth Charter, 5E, 5B, how important it is for that institution. So let's score 1, 0 to 3. And then how much that institution is actually applying or not that principle in their context. And the result of that is, it's actually a graphics that I don't know why it's not in this presentation. The result of that is basically graphics. It's graphics to show the discrepancy or not of how much we think a value related to their study is important or not for us, and how much my institution is actually implementing the value. And actually that's very easy to do because it's an Excel file that we have developed. But what requires is time and people to dialogue and reflect upon what do you understand on these values, how much do we think this is important, and what we are doing on that. And the result of that are actually graphics, looking at each principle of the Earth Charter and how an institution is actually doing. We have never, I think, I can't remember if there's any group that is doing that in an individual basis. But I thought this presentation had the graphic that I wanted to show you, and obviously it doesn't have here. So I'm sorry for that. And the other one is this We Value website that here. Can you see this one?
Yes.
So it's a group of people who are really interested in values-based approach of assessing. And they have also created some materials to help guide people towards values-based evaluation. And of course, they use their charter as a tool in that process. Anyway, I don't want to take over too much, sorry. Too much of time, but I just thought of sharing. We do have these two kind of tools that we have been involved with or developed that look at this assessment question through the lenses of their charter.
Thank you so much for sharing those. That's very helpful, and I'm sorry to take you, as we would say, down the rabbit hole into one specific area too deep. But I think it's good. I think that it's very interesting and relevant to what we're talking about, particularly in terms of connecting the theory to practice and the urge in education to assess what we do. So thank you for sharing that with us. Were there any other comments about values while we have Marian here with us? And you're going to stay with us, I hope, but we'll probably want to talk to a couple of other presenters before our time is up. Rosalind, are we here until, are we here for another 35 minutes?
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we have an hour to an hour and a half according to Victor's reservation of Zoom.
Okay. All right, very good. And so, Lorna, I wonder, I see that you're here and you're also on the schedule and have presented, and you presented integrating ESD into literature and language textbooks. Is there, does anyone have questions for Lorna? Or Lorna, did you have anything you could share with us in brief summary about your presentation that might kick off a discussion that you think is important about this topic?
Yes, I'd like to share a couple of things that I deliberately did not put into the video. But it's because I want to get feedback, but because the project is ongoing, I had to be mindful about some of the issues. One of the main issues that we faced was what ESD or what SD, what sustainable development topic should actually be embedded and what should not be. There were questions about climate change. Oh, I need to let you know that this particular project was looking at textbooks for primary, for children at the primary level. And there was a lot of discussion about whether children could understand anything about climate change. And if we included content about that, if we weren't simply setting up the children for rote learning. So there was a lot of debate there. And there were other concepts such as organic farming, which was part of the context actually of the children in this area. And again, there were there was a lot of debate, a lot of discussion about whether children could possibly understand anything about organic farming. And I think what it came down to was that some of the scientists in the group felt that you couldn't just present a concept in part, but you had to give a kind of holistic view. There were others of us who felt that students could get an appreciation of some things because, you know, they are living in an area where they're seeing their parents and their community, other community members doing organic farming, for example, and they are experiencing things related to climate, a change in climate. And there were also issues concerning like air pollution. Well, in terms of the context of the textbook, air pollution was not a problem, though in a couple states or in the capital itself, air pollution was a real problem. So the question was, do you engage with issues that the children are not directly affected by? So those were some of the things. And I think anytime you're thinking about embedding ESD into a textbook, you also have to consider what content is appropriate, or you have to agree on the content or on the issues. And I want to pick up a question that Uchi kind of raised. There were questions too about religious traditions. What happens when you are in an area where there are many religious traditions? How do you navigate that? What actually goes into the textbook to form part of the value aspect of the textbook? And in terms of social issues, there was a feeling that certain social issues should not be exposed at all because, you know, such things were not politically correct. So I just wanted to add that and perhaps get some feedback from the group in terms of your own thinking and feeling.
These are excellent questions, and I suspect everyone is kind of reflecting on, carefully thinking about any response to this question. Just a general question. Again, because I'm not at the primary level, but when you talk to young children about issues, do they tend to repeat what their parents say? You know, is it difficult to break free from that?
I find that children ask questions, and some children actually challenge what parents say or what the dominant thinking of their group is. They do. And I've been kind of engaging in finding out more about what children think about various issues. I think, like, even questions like death and violence, those are questions children are raising because they're seeing what's happening. They're, they see what happens when there is flooding, and they know people die. And they ask questions about that. And they will hear their parents. Some parents might say these are acts of God, there's nothing we can do. But they will also challenge that depending on the household. Whether the household allows for that kind of questioning. I just think there are it seems to me that when you're thinking about embedding ESD, whether in a textbook or in a curriculum, you also have to consider how appropriate, how politically wise certain issues are.
I was interested in your question about how complete an understanding is necessary. So one side of that argument seems to be that you shouldn't teach an issue partly that you would need to teach it completely in order for somebody to develop the understanding, and another side is that it's okay to have a partial understanding. And I'm going back, I guess, to our conversation this morning about complexity. I think everything is contextual. I think that some concepts, some ideas, for example, the concept of justice or the concept of equity, is a complex concept that takes multiple examples and time to learn. So I would want people to revisit those ideas in multiple contexts over time. And but a more concrete or a more declarative concept might be something that you could, like, what do we mean by climate change, or what is an ecosystem? So I guess for me, it would depend on the curriculum structure and the level of the curriculum and the desired outcomes from that conversation. So if it was young children, I would want them to have a broad understanding of the concept with the hope and expectation that they would revisit it frequently. And then for others, maybe there is a time for a deeper engagement with it. The reason I struggle with that is because in our teacher ed program right now, there is this tension about how much in somebody's discipline do they need to be able to be qualified to teach college in order to teach math, or can we accept a less, somebody can be a very good teacher but maybe not have as deep an understanding of their content. And I think for us, we're interested in erring on the side of teachers who have values that we think are important, respecting all students, a commitment to equity, to social justice. And because that allows us perhaps to bring people in who might not have a disciplinary major, for example, a degree in mathematics, but may have know enough mathematics so that they could be an effective teacher. And I think the same applies with this work of sustainable development, sustainability. I think that all of these ideas are complex and take time and practice. So I would want people to get started and have a good enough understanding with the belief that we can come back and continue to refine it and beef it up. My only concern is that we not teach false information or preconceptions that we need to go back and tune them up later. But if we wait, I guess the expression that comes to mind for me is, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That getting started is a good place to get started. and particularly the work with values. But that's just my opinion from here.
So, Lorna, I think that all curriculum have holes in them, especially when it comes to contemporary issues. I did an analysis a few years ago of the Tennessee curriculum, and we didn't mention poverty. And yet, we have Appalachia. It has a tremendous problem with poverty, both historically and currently. And, our children see homeless on the way to school in the morning, especially in the city where I am right now, which is Salem, Oregon. And they see the headlines. So they're not ignorant of these things. They see them every day, and yet the school curriculum doesn't help them make sense of it. But that's true, I think, of every state, provincial, or national curriculum. I think then one of the questions is how we as educators deal with it.
You are absolutely right, Rosalind. That is the issue. I believe children are seen and they are hearing. And I think pretending that they're not is actually to go back. We're retrogressing, where in a sense we are trying to keep them in this kind of very perfect world. And even with this project, one of the other issues was their children, they just should really have just fun activities and pleasant activities. You can't bring in anything that might be unpleasant or so on. And so there was quite a bit of discussion around that as well. So thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Lorna as well. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, just ask, related to that, Victor, you've presented about pedagogy and sustainability. Would you like to continue the discussion along the lines of your presentation?
Well, I feel like I've gotten a lot of airplay on this conference because I had the panel and I have the expert video, and I've been moderating. So I'm a little reluctant to take up any more time now unless anybody has questions or issues they want to talk about. I feel like it's been such a wonderful conversation here today with the focus on values and the work that you were just describing, Lorna. So I'll defer unless there's somebody that has a burning desire for me to talk some more. So, but I think that the idea of, I'm sorry, that was my computer making loud noises here. But the idea of,
I would like to hear something more about the ESD pedagogies, please.
Okay, good. Oh, all right. Well, thank you, Lorna. Yes, and Marianne's raising her thumb. Okay, you're not going to let me get away with it. Okay, so thank you. Well, I think that the issue for me, and I picked up on a little bit this morning, is when we talk about Gloria Ladson Billings' work, or I use the work of Django Paris, culturally sustaining or culturally relevant pedagogy. And I think it came out in the conversation the other day about bringing local knowledge, bringing knowledge from communities into the curriculum and into the classroom. For me, that's the value of technology, that we have the potential for bringing in local indigenous knowledge from around the world to bear on these challenges and issues. And it allows us to get out of our echo chamber so that we're not hearing only the values and the perspectives that are comfortable and local for us. And it also allows a lot of other voices to be heard when we're trying to solve these very complex global problems. So, the idea of finding ways for our students to honor their perspectives that are from their communities, from their value systems, from their culture, and for making sure that we're not, and particularly in the U.S., because we are, as Lauren and I were talking before we got started here, the U.S. is a colonizer. We're still a colonizer. There were 3 centuries of genocide on this continent. The U.S. benefited from 3 centuries or more of enslavement. You know, we have a huge problem in this country that truth is not told. That truth is not told in our history books. It is minimalized in history books. And for the many people in this country have not begun to understand the truth of our existence here. So that means that there are many cultures whose perspectives are not always heard in schools. There are many perspectives that are just not present in our textbooks. I was in a meeting just yesterday with this local school district. We have 63 languages spoken in our local school district from people, from children, families. And yet most of those languages and those cultures are invisible in the local curriculum. So when we think about, you know, that question of whose values, you know, for me, the important way that I feel like I have to answer that question is anyone's values, as long as it's not perpetuating the dominant culture of oppression. And these are interconnected systems of oppression. So for me, the systems of oppression that create climate change are inseparable from the systems of oppression that create racism, misogyny, homophobia, Islamophobia, and all of those things, and certainly and especially classism, ableism. So when I think about our pedagogy, I think it's so important that we have this work that we're doing, focusing on the questions that I think Don and Garth were asking earlier about, you know, what does it take to create what does the world view this as? Can we create a safe and just space for everyone, for all beings, for all times, which, Marion, is your work with the Earth Charter. And when we ask that question, you know, that takes us in a very different direction than, can we continue to grow our economy? Do we need to build a wall to keep, you know, people out from coming in the southern border? You know, do we have to restrict people coming to the United States? You know, all of the many questions that in which our public discourse has devolved in the United States these days. Simply asking that question, what does it take to create a safe and just space for all? And then letting the answers be guided by the cultures and the perspectives, the funds of knowledge in the local community. You know, that's where I go when I think about culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally sustaining pedagogy. And there's a lot of research, there's quite a body of research about culturally relevant pedagogy that I really encourage us to embrace in our work with sustainability.
Can I just make a comment here? I like very much what you have shared and the emphasis you have given to culturally relevant pedagogy. So I wanted to share that this morning I went with the students here from the University for Peace to a school inside the indigenous community. So where we are located, there is a small indigenous community half an hour from where we are. And there is a school inside the indigenous community. And of course, it's a public school that belongs to the public education system here. It's only a primary school. But it's very interesting that most of the school runs as any other school around Costa Rica when it comes to math, social studies, language, etc. But they have incorporated, because of the Costa Rican, I think, policy, an extra course inside that school that is about the culture of that community. So we spent the morning today with this teacher that gives that class. And it's amazing to see all the values that are embedded there and his focus in strengthening a sense of pride and rescuing this children connection with their traditions. and how important it is. I mean, if we look at sustainability or ESD through the lenses of flexibility, education, ESD should be contextualized, participatory, and also elevate the cultural, I mean, as you say, the cultural relevance. I mean, that for me was a wonderful example of two things at the same time. So there is the education system that is implemented inside the indigenous community with a small public school for primary schools, like any other primary schools in Costa Rica. But they have a track inside the school that is really addressing the cultural relevancy of that context in many ways. No, so he's ensuring that they know about handicrafts of that. So like everybody in the school knows how to weave, to make baskets or any other handicrafts. There, the music, the tales, because normally tales, no, we say tales, folktale legends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are traditional legends that are not necessarily taught in normal schools or conventional schools, but in that particular school, now is part of the curriculum for the kids to learn their own traditional legends. Anyway, just
that really gets very much at the kind of thing I'm thinking of. You know, here in North America, and including in Central America, at the time of European first contact, there were as many as 100 million people on the North and South America, but certainly there were 10 million here in North America, and by some estimates, probably another 6 million, and down into where you are, Miriam. That was roughly the same number of people that lived in Europe at that time. There's this image that people have of North American indigenous populations as being Neolithic hunter-gatherers. But at the time of first contact, people here were farmers, they were architects, they were artists. There were the entire eastern half of the United States had already been under agriculture, land management, but it wasn't recognized by European standards. One of the examples that I like to think about is a building structure that was present here in the part of the Northwest where Rosalind and I are, the longhouse. The longhouse technology is a beautiful technology when you look at how they were built. And they sustained our Northwest winters when it blows, 50, 60 miles an hour on the coast. It rains all the time. And those longhouses would stand for years and years. They were made of beautiful old growth cedar. And the reason I bring all that up is because these cultures had survived for 10,000 years. They'd survived for 10,000 years, including that indigenous culture that you were talking about, Miriam. It was probably, there's probably been in Costa Rica and Central America, continuous inhabitants who had these very thriving cultures. Today, we wonder what it would take to create a sustainable culture. What does sustainability look like? And when people arrived here, they already knew what sustainability looked like. They knew how to live in terms of the land. And it's easy to romanticize and say, we're going to go back to an indigenous way of being. That's not what I'm saying. But there were so many values that were lost because of the colonization here. And we can make the same statement about Southern African region, that they're, so Uche and those of you that live in Southern Africa region. So, for me, bringing those indigenous values into the curriculum, it isn't just a way of honoring what was lost, but for me, there's actually some hope that if we can rediscover, or at least refine our pathway back to what kept those communities alive. And it isn't necessarily technology. We don't have to go back and live in longhouses and eschew all of the conveniences that we can kind of stand to live with. But it's those core values of community, of using only what is enough, and respecting elders, a different way of thinking about learning. And that, and as Michele and Rosalind will attest, here in the US in this time, those are values that are almost non-existent. Families are exploded, they're blown apart, they don't live near each other. We don't have a value of sufficiency. We're coming into the season, this holiday season, where there's a metric of how much people spend, that really drives the economy. So for me, that this is really a matter of survival to bring culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogy into the classroom. And I don't know any other way to do this except to help prepare teachers who embrace that set of values. That's the group who I can imagine at this point in my life that, my teachers will long outlive me, and I can hope that at least, in their lifetime, that they aren't going to continue to perpetuate and reproduce these systems of oppression that are killing the planet, they're killing people. Climate change, a 1.5 degree climate warming is a death sentence. It's a death sentence for millions of people around the planet, and we're completely indifferent to that in public policy. So when I talk about values, that's the value that I'm talking about. So I love that example, Marion, that you just gave.
Any comments for Victor? Oh, Uche, we can't hear you. I think your mic is muted.
Good. Okay, I've unmuted it. Okay. Okay, I need to ask a question, quick one to Victor. As an expert in sustainability pedagogy, because that's what I know you as, read your book, though not completely, and hearing you speak. We have a peculiar problem in my country, and I don't know if it's like that in the US. I doubt, because you're not a multicultural society. In a multicultural society, I hear you talk about culturally relevant pedagogy. And my question is, how do you apply culturally relevant pedagogy in a multicultural classroom? Because that's what we face in my country. How would that apply? Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to mute you because we hear background noise here, but we really are a multicultural society in the US, but we don't acknowledge the multiple cultures. The culture that is perpetuated it isn't really a culture at all. It's a dominant paradigm that doesn't respect, what Marion was just describing. We have in our music classes, people learn the music of dead white men European music. We have very little experience in our music classes with indigenous music. In our English classes in high schools, unless teachers are very explicit about bringing other literature in, it's a very narrow canon that focuses on usually men and dominant cultures, so it's often white men. Our science classes are dominated by 19th and 20th century perspectives on what passes as knowledge and how is research done. So when I think about culturally relevant or culturally sustaining pedagogy, it's acknowledging, in your case, acknowledging that those multiple cultures exist and that they're not in competition with each other, that our life is enhanced, we're made more sustainable when we can bring the knowledge and the values together instead of putting them in opposition to each other. So your example of the girls wearing hijab when they came to schools, it's really too bad that couldn't have been celebrated as here, look how diverse we are. Look at how we can figure out in a way that respects and honors the values that come together in this situation. But too often we put them in competition. So either you do it our way or the highway. We're not going to do it your way. But so when I think about culturally sustaining pedagogy, it's acknowledging that multiple cultures exist and what can we learn from one another, and making sure that that's part of the classroom and part of the curriculum. And there are some strategies for making sure it's part of the curriculum. I don't know if that helps at all.
We couldn't hear you. Did you have a response for Victor?
Yeah, no, I just say thank you. I think I got something. Not quite, not completely though, but something to go home with. Because I keep saying the more important thing is the specifics on how. That is what brings about sustainability. So if in a classroom, for instance, that we almost have about 3-4 cultures with different values. So if you want to achieve sustainability from the point of view of each of these diverse cultures, how do you do it? How? The question is how. And that is one thing that, yeah, go on, please.
I think Marion's question is where I would go is what unites us? What do we have in common? What are those values that we share? You know, and her question, I think, is such a powerful question, is what do we imagine that we want for ourselves? You know, and I imagine if you brought, 17 parents together from 17 cultures, none of those parents would say, I want my child to starve or to experience violence. You know, I think none of those parents would say, I want my child to be bullied. They would all say, I want my child to have a healthy and just life. I want them to thrive. And I think that opens up that conversation, is that what does it take to create that kind of a thriving community? How do we work together to make sure that that's the goal and that's the value system that we all embrace?
I can just share some examples that may not be exactly what you're looking for, Uche, but kind of relate to what the two of you are talking about, I think, is that in Harrisonburg, we officially or unofficially are a refugee resettlement location. So we have, 50 different countries represented and 50 languages spoken with more countries represented. And the schools system celebrates that diversity. And I would say that we don't actually seem to have a majority of any one kind of student. They're all very different. My children are not the majority, anyone else's children either. And the school has flags from all of the countries hanging in the commons area. We have international days where people wear their dress from their countries to school, and they play it up in social media and talk about, say something about their countries and feel part of their group within the larger group. Everything that happens in the schools is celebrating the differences and the diversity that we have, probably rather than looking for a commonality. And but the commonality would be, for the high school I'm thinking of in particular, little slogans about the attitude that we bring to school. This is your education, come and get it, is a big sign on the wall. I noticed the other day, Gandhi, quotes from Gandhi on the wall, what we kind of value as a school, and how that serves the good of all in this school. We have interpreters for most of these languages. We have homeschool liaisons who work directly with the families. We don't have, sometimes there's not a lot of parental involvement, and it's partly a cultural thing. And so it is largely up to the children to bring this together and to identify and to be a part of this, which has been an incredibly positive experience and unique experience, I think, for my children and my husband who teaches in the schools as well. But we also have an international festival every year in town. So everyone comes, and you can go booth to booth to booth and try their food and try, ask about their clothing and participate in their celebrations. And so it's very engaged as a community.
Yes, I agree. I agree. More of that than trying, to apply what unites. Like in my university, we have cultural week for each culture. So that culture comes around the whole campus, showcases, others who like may join them. But it also says you appreciate what they have, you accept people the way they live and the way they are. So I think that's a good approach. Thank you.
Sure. And I know that we're out of time, so I can just, since I'm facilitating, try to very quickly just say that I hope you get a chance to look at my technology presentation if you have not already. Technology isn't on the forefront. I'm not worried about not being able to sit here and talk about technology with you for a long time. It should empower the work that we do and help empower the work that we do, and the way that we go about doing what we do is more important than any one particular tool, and these tools change daily. So in that presentation, you would see ideas for making teaching and learning more efficient, more effective, using online technologies and tools and resources that cross-discipline and help us meet particular objectives, such as helping our students think critically or collaborate and communicate, and things that we want all students to be able to do. And I think we have run out of time. So Rosalind, are you still with me? I think we've got, I'm afraid we're going to get disconnected here. But anyway, yeah, other presenters talked about having field trips, taking students elsewhere, that sort of thing. So many, many different opportunities. I hope you'll take a look. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. It's on the spreadsheet that Rosalind sent to everyone with all of our contact info.
Yeah, I think we're probably okay on the Zoom because it's on my account. I don't remember. I might have left it alone, so.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Michele, for facilitating our conversation. A lot of very interesting ground.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. So I really appreciate the input everyone has had and your time that you're spending. And I'm glad that everyone found us at this link at this time. We had no big complications with the audio or anything. So yeah, if you have any questions about technology, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any questions for anyone else, maybe we can address that now. I know that some people probably need to get going though, if this is our final.
We recorded this. Mary and I missed about the first minute or two of yours because frankly, I forgot to turn the recording on when you were just starting. But we have all but that minute or two recorded, and that will be up at the conference site. And then we will also, and that conference site will be archived for rather than a year.
I'm not quite sure how long it will be archived.
Yeah.
And I know that we are all now members of the Educator Learning Network, so we can continue to meet through this platform and use the resources, the free resources that are on it.
And we haven't talked about it yet as our ESD Innovate team, but these files all exist as separate files, and it's possible that we could archive there as well to make sure that they're available widely through just a click. So we're committed as a group to making sure that this information is kept available. So I'm looking forward to going back and re-listening to the things that you were saying, Marianne, because I was trying to take notes and I did neither very well. I didn't take notes very well and I didn't listen very well. So I need to go back and re-listen. So. Okay. So I'm so grateful that you were able to get a video and join us, and everyone else too. It's been, it's been a really amazing several days to just see how this whole process has worked, and this feels like a nice capstone.
Yes.
Yes.
Nice capstone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was really solid work here.
Lorna, it's been so wonderful to be with you again too.
Yeah.
Thanks, ESD Innovate team. Wonderful, wonderful creative approach.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I'm very appreciative of all the learning that I have been exposed to. Thank you.
Marceline, it's been a treat to meet you and talk with you.
Yes. Thanks. I hope we meet again soon.
Well, let's plan on it.
Yes. even if it's online, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for the opportunity. I'm grateful. I have, well, first of all, the most important, to see all of you and to hear each one of you has been very enriching and feels in my heart. Good. Thank you for the opportunity and the space to share.
Marion,
I didn't know what was the format, so it's good to be here.
Marion, let's not let 4 years go by before we do this again, okay? The last time, yeah, so maybe we could make, if you're interested, because we know you have lots of spare time.
Well, my family would not agree so much with that.
So we will reach out to you and find something we can do together for everyone on the call here. Marceline, this is you too. But yes, Marion, you'll be hearing from us.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope to be in touch, and all the best.
All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. So nice to meet you all.
Yes.
Bye.
All right, Razan and Michele, it's been wonderful. Michele, you can go get 5 hours of sleep tonight.
I hope so. I'm hoping for 5.
Rather than you can get 3, that would be a new record for you this week.
I'm actually going to go spend some time with my family. I've been here for the last 6 weeks.
I'm curious to what your family's doing, because while you were talking, there was people outside your window putting a ladder up. So
My husband was cleaning the roof and the gutters.
I wondered if Dean was going to stick his face in there. I was hoping he would.
Ah, yes. Life goes on around me.
That was perfect. Well, wonderful. Marion, it's been wonderful to see you, and Rosalind and Michele. Maybe we should do a call. Next week's not good. Maybe the week after we could do a call.
Yes, I think that would be a very good idea, because I heard very clear, strong voice in the text and in these conferences that we need more professional development for teacher educators.
Yeah. And, I think,
and maybe a different kind of professional development for teacher educators as well.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that qualification. You're absolutely right.
True.
Okay, so we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot, everybody.
bye-bye, everyone.
Genuine pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.